Hi guys, welcome to your lesson on food chains and food webs. This is definitely something you guys have seen before in probably 5th grade, 6th grade science. This might be review in the beginning, but we're going to add on to it because it does get a lot more complex. So the first thing we're going to talk about are ecosystem interactions. Organisms in an ecosystem are constantly interacting, and those interactions cause three main things, depending on how they interact. They can cause stability within ecosystems, meaning that they're stable, their populations aren't growing too much, or they're not decreasing too much. Depending on the interactions, populations can either grow or decline. And then depending on the interactions, there could be also changes in abiotic, the non-living, and biotic factors, the living factors. So a stable ecosystem. Characteristics of a stable ecosystem are the following. Population numbers of each organism fluctuate or change at a predictable rate. So there's not huge spikes in a graph. There's not too many or too few. The supply of resources in the physical environment changes at a predictable rate. So the resources, we know there aren't too many or too few. And then energy flows through the ecosystem at a fairly constant rate over time. There's not too much or too little. And all those things put together create a stable ecosystem. Predator-prey relationships help to stabilize ecosystems. So things that eat other things help to make the ecosystem stable so that there's not too much of one thing or too few of one thing. There's just the perfect amount. As the prey population increases, so does the predator population. That's how predator-prey relationships work. As the prey population decreases, so does the predator population. So if there isn't any food for the predators to eat, well then the predators are going to eventually start dying and their population is going to decrease also. So here's a graph that shows that, and if you look at the prey, there's a lot of prey. There are not immediately a lot of predators. They have to start eating the prey and then reproducing, and over time there's more predators. And then you notice the prey dips down. The predators don't dip down immediately. Over time, the predators don't have enough prey and their population goes down. So predator-prey relationships are hugely dependent on one another. If one goes up, the other goes up. If one goes down, the other goes down. All right, limited resources. When resources are limited, species will compete for resources. Species will compete for resources when they are limited. Yes, there's a typo. It says species with compete. It should say will. So if, in the world, there's not enough water, humans are going to compete for water. That is a fact. This can be among the same or different species, but usually within the same niche. Okay, a niche is the role that an organism plays in its environment, and it includes the type of food that it eats, it's how it gets its food, how it interacts with other organisms. Okay, so flow of energy in ecosystems. A food chain is the simplest path that energy takes through an ecosystem. Energy enters an ecosystem from the sun, and then each level in the transfer of energy in an ecosystem is called a trophic level. So, flow of energy in ecosystems continued. Organisms in each trophic level use some of the energy in the process of cellular respiration, lose energy from heat loss, and store the rest. Okay, so I just said the ecosystem gets all of its energy from the sun. So, if you look at this diagram, you notice that the producers, the grasses, are getting all of their energy from the sun because producers photosynthesize. They get their food from the sun. Okay, then the primary consumers, like little insects, grasshoppers, eat the producers, the grass. And then the snakes, secondary consumers, are going to eat the grasshoppers. And then the tertiary consumers, the hawks, are going to eat the snakes. When anything dies, it's going to decompose, and fungus is going to help it. That provides nutrients for the grass, and food chain starts all over again. Okay, so trophic levels. First trophic level are producers. Okay, producers are called autotrophs. Autotrophs make their own food. Okay? Producers are grasses. So producers are autotrophs. They make their own food. That means grasses make their own food from the sun. So photosynthesis, that's what that means. Second trophic level are primary consumers. These are herbivores. They eat plants only, and they are heterotrophs. The prefix hetero, remember, means different. So different kinds of food. They don't just eat one type of food, and they don't make their own food. The third trophic level, or higher, secondary, tertiary consumers, can be carnivores. They eat only primary consumers, or they can be either carnivores or omnivores, and eat only primary consumers if they're carnivores. So if they only eat meat, they're going to only eat the primary consumers, and if they only eat meat and plants, they're going to eat both primary consumers and the producers. A heterotroph that breaks down organic material, returns it to the soil, is a decomposer. So anything that breaks down living material, maybe that's died, returns it to the soil, and that in turn gives the soil nutrients so that the producers can have more nutrients in the soil. Okay, so here's an awesome diagram, all right? So producers are at the bottom, that's the first trophic level. Producers are plants. Plants are autotrophic. They make their own food. The second trophic level are primary consumers. Those are herbivores, things that only eat plants. Okay, the primary consumers eat the producers. Everything eats the level that's under it, except for the producers. They don't eat anything under it because they are the bottom. But what they get their food from is the sun. And because every level depends on them, and they depend on the sun, it means that every level also depends on the sun. The secondary consumers are small carnivores. They eat the primary consumers, okay? Tertiary consumers are larger carnivores. They eat the secondary consumers. They might also eat some primary consumers, okay? Anybody in there who is an omnivore will also eat plants. Omnivores, that means they eat plants and animals. And notice, autotrophs and heterotrophs. Autotrophs, the only part of an ecosystem that are autotrophs are the producers. They make their own food from the sun. All right, food webs represent many interconnected food chains. So remember, a food chain is when one thing eats another, and that eats another, and that eats another. It's very, very simple, linear path. A food web represents many interconnected food chains. So when you put lots of those paths together, that's what a food web is. All right, so here you go, tons of different paths. So the way that you read one of these is not by going up. So the grass doesn't eat the rabbits. If you look at the bottom left, okay, the bottom is all plants. Those are our producers. The producers don't eat the rabbits. It's the other way around. The rabbits and the squirrels and the mice and the seed-eating birds and the herbivorous insects and the predaceous insects. Well, not the predaceous insects, sorry, just the herbivorous insects. They all eat the plants, okay? If you look at the fox, there are arrows pointing to the fox. If you trace each of those arrows, that's what the fox eats. So we're going to start at the left. You start at the fox and look down. The fox eats rabbits. The fox eats squirrels. The fox eats mice. The fox eats seed-eating birds. The fox eats insectivorous birds. Okay? Hawks and owls, they both eat rabbits, squirrels, mice, seed-eating birds, insectivorous birds. If you look at toads, the only thing on here that toads eat, if you look down, are the predaceous insects. Insectivorous bird, that eats spiders, and it eats predaceous insects and herbivorous insects. So you have to start at the top and look down to the level under it to see what that thing eats, not the bottom up. It doesn't point to what it eats, it points to what eats it. So, food web, okay? Again, the bottom are autotrophs, those are producers. Then you have primary consumers. Everything eats the level under it.
Everything above producers are heterotrophs, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, and quaternary consumers. Quaternary consumers are usually humans. We eat everything underneath us. So we are